Good evening, everybody, and thank you, and thank you for coming. We're to the second Holloway event of the fall season. Holloway on Zoom. I'm very happy to welcome Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon to the Holloway Zoom stage, and glad as well to welcome Nate Schmidt. And I'm very glad to see all of you out there in your boxes by name or in your faces. Um, Nate is going to read first. He'll be introduced by Dylan Foucault, and then Lyrae will read, and Pedro Rulon, grad student comp lit, will introduce her. So without further ado, I'll ask Dylan to just introduce Nate to us. Thank you all.
Right. Okay. In a suite of poems entitled More Life, Nate Schmidt writes, looking past it down the coast, before I rest my head against yours, I discern through the glare or low haze an abandoned cruiser. Or is it a trawler with reinforced nets? Or an inflatable raft shunted onto its side against a low ridge, or a mock snow, end quote. This successive string of oars conjoins possible discernments or representations of an object, an abandoned cruiser, a trawler, a raft, that might in the end be a representation itself, a fabrication, an inflatable raft, or a mock snow. Or is it that the mock snow is an alternative way of apprehending the low ridge against which the raft is shunted onto its side? How can we know that the raft or craft by which one hopes to survive crisis isn't itself an artificial ground on which we're shipwrecked? How can we be confident that poetic craft is sufficiently supported, that it isn't, so to speak, turtles all the way down? Such an anxiety is suggested in Nate's adaptive translations of André Breton, dismiss crude evidence, laying turtles. That was a quote. And yet these poems refuse to lie down with skepticism. While they do not suppose a transcendental system, they do work exhaustively with assiduous care through the entailments of a given form, and in this sense could be considered systematic. In fact, the assumption of a particular form is pre-given, as if it comes from some other source than the poet himself, as surely one believes it must, is their originating action. The lyric mode that Nate practices is not interested in producing epiphanies or moments of subjective clarity, but in iterating their continual dissolution. Quote, someone drew apart the curtains and the stone falls below the stars, end quote. At the level of diction, these dissolutions take on the appearance of cliché, those beautiful though precarious frozen surfaces that we might provisionally occupy together. Indeed, they are cliches if you will allow a separation of cliché from its derogatory associations, and Nate's poems practically compel such a separation. This is their ultimate success. Insofar as they are provisional and liable to melt under our feet, cliches are deployed and redeployed in these poems with generosity and resilience. The question is not what truths do cliches represent or what makes them beautiful, but rather, what do these inherited reproducible impressions of eyes, of stars grant us? Quote, hold me with your eyes, whose craft moves without assurance in the breach of terror, end quote. Notice again the invocation of craft. I think of Nate's poems as having a horizontal and a vertical dimension, corresponding to the progress of the line towards the margin and the accumulation of lines into stanzas as they descend the page. The poetic line carries the cliché through to its terminus, only to give over to a new beginning and the promise, not the guarantee, of buoyancy. These poems take clichés seriously as, on the one hand, the slimmest of grounds on which to stand and the most necessary through which to fall. Clichés give us, after all, a common vehicle of communication, of intimacy, or in any case, the impression of one. But the commonplaces of communication are not in themselves sufficient for us to accomplish anything by means of them. Something else is required of us, and it is the task of the poet to stake out such a requirement, which requirements Nate considers to be social, if not political. Quote, "What are to be our terms of solidarity with each other? We cannot merely like the same things, have the same opinions. And as we surely know, it is difficult to live out adopted commitments that are to have replaced our given attachments. I want to refuse mourning and uplift alike," end quote. Nate's work is no doubt beautifully crafted, but what is more beautiful is its unflagging commitment to craft in the face of all that might provoke our cynicism. Please join me in welcoming Nate Schmidt.
Can everyone hear me okay? All right, beautiful. Well, for another cliche, Dylan, thank you for the really sweet and generous introduction. And thank you to everyone for being here. This is the first reading I've done in my life, so it's really a joy to be here with you all. I think before I get started, I just want to say that in the interest of respecting whatever technological glitches might come up, I've kind of narrowed down what I'll be reading in case, there, a delay or what have you. But I thought I had something else to say. And if at any point my audio starts bugging out, just please, interrupt me and I'll start the line or stanza over and go from there. And then finally, so Dylan has quoted, he's maybe given away two of the things I'll be reading from. One poem, some from an earlier sequence, the first sequence really called More Life, a second sequence called Jambon, or Ham, a joke, or a third, which is currently in progress, called The Hurting, after the Tears for Fears first album. The first and the last poem I read will be the first and the last poems from Jambon. The second poem will be Not Thoughts from More Life. And the third poem, or block, I think block might be a better word for it, is from the work in progress I've provisionally called The Hurting. I guess here it goes. Against the biting held near, from the last arcade, dismiss crude evidence, laying turtles, that things have to change, if we are made to be happy, made free, to choose instead your eyes, how you were holding me with them through shared havoc. For I love you, to say, it could have been better, and say, for I love you. Not thoughts. A broken torso tilts into half flight, mounted on a low platform rotated by touch. The front is ridged, the reach of severed arms locked up in the raised joints. What could clatter here? Not lungs, only operations on the riverfront, or lake winds that shake this storage, for not a glass pavilion. This is not a continuation of the Elsie series, 250 charity letter. The windows high above are reinforced. The doors are soldered shut to protect the statue from theft. But could it break down in extreme cold? What circulates inside it? Could it be held for now as found? To start it rotating, force against the disc at high rate, so a figure might spindle out anew. Strewn at the base from a shifted camp lie a can exfoliated into a knife, juice dry on the lid, rinds, cores, a red carton, a paper bag overturned, running salt from its folds on to be waste on the floor, no meat to absorb it. Lake winds jangle no hooks above. The platform as it spins stirs lint, threads, stone, sawdust put down for blood, as down between walls of shadow, iron laws. Music of the river dyed green for a day. In it there is a voice, her father's last, poor, and find the post office alone to eke out what is called living, so long as she's got new hat. Meanwhile, the spinning platform hums fast enough now that the gaps in outline close together in a conjured volume. From this sheer cylinder, first thighs separate out, then there are legs to hold a torso away from the earth. The half-flight shifts by itself, charting developments, with no pigeon roosting here to measure out expansion. Still, the litter has been cleared, whose drift shows in the carpet, blind worms, neighbor to the lakeside refinery, a meek knock, meanwhile, as from the torso the legs reach down to the floor, as near her she hears the warden virtue following to see her through the next reverse, as the last ice shoal breaks up on the river and liquid returns to the lake for now. Extended full, yet both shins curve inward. Already air has warped the sockets, the knees are filed, flattening what light reaches them and composing the feet bones' steel-toed boots. Work is not to be had without them. Bees with their sense cannot repair such injuries, as neither could she her father's indiscretions, worrying, could it become you? The shock reverberates of an arm unlocking from its joint, rising as predicted, but without sparrows. Against coruscated roof, the unfolding elbow points, then falls back, down to her side. She's too weak to hold it to noontime glare. Her hat forgotten at the last shop were turned out, then 125. A bridge is raised for a train of freighted barges emitting steam that blocks the upper windows, or from pipes beneath the floor which issue outside the walls as your arm rests on the column of your hip, veins fluted out strictly to guide what rain leaks in quickly over the hand. Some, though, must catch on the cast, layered by relief from your wrist. Set against the hip, it leverages the arm apart, if only moss could pleat a stable volume. Over fake plaster knuckles project, marked for tattooing, not yet as fragile. The forearm is drawn across the torso, untapped, but without stone cord to brace it. So once each other's arms. At this memory, she stops on a stone threshold, hisses, no raven serpent, a stovetop kettle, or through the floor, mains in disrepair. No sooner than installed, found always crumbling neighbor to ankles, she falls to the nearest chair. Your hand presses on the rib cage, your arm rises to drop with the stomach. The front is ridged anew, its cavity, though stiff with fluid, still untapped. So her tears keep falling. Down its front, her dress is spangled with them, no cat even, of liberty to frolic between her shoes, wet through from the street washer at mere sense. Carried inland on lake winds turn afar a mass of gulls, and rain that slurs the windows, light through them can't diminish the action of your sternum. How then to soothe Qatar by a comforting squeeze, offer of easy money? She looks up, your legs, your hands, your neck. It arcs for crying, giving up what air passes, your throat, your nose flutters, not. Polyps line its bridge, eyelids narrow, strained. Your mouth is a cut, your jaw will not flex even for an inhaler. Is it already broken? For fixed slot, weekly pay. She feels earned a park bench, spared unlike you, plate damage that scares off parakeets, spared to cold floods that guarantee spring. Even her hat is since forgotten and lost so around us every day. But starlings by their flight, winds by a sudden increase, the lake in full summer, there was to have been more life. Say you could have been 10 feet tall. That's the next poem, right? This next poem, as I said earlier, comes from a work in progress called The Hurting. And I expect this will be the first chunk of, literal chunk of it. Last night, while lying next to you, I dreamed that we could not have left in time, and we were overtaken. In your eyes, I see the trunk burnt up across the stream from where we are sleeping and the smoke falling above it still. Be still. Polystyrene somewhere is clicking to burst a light, and we cannot find it. Is it in the outbuildings we passed earlier in the night, and we cannot have stayed, and we were quiet again? I take your hand and feel the material of your outer coat. Is it for the last time? Was it? Flammable and swollen with microfibers, or it is air. It is surplus. Is it? Was it? And we were not ready. We have begun already to breathe less easily. We do not admit it. The air is choked, and to understand that still, be still. We will not have known how to explain what is happening. Has it already? Is it? Was it? There to start from, and we were staying. The series of falls beyond the tree line are diminished in volume, and the stream is not moving. Tonight, Is it tomorrow? Was it? Still, be still. And we were lost to each other. In your eyes, again in your eyes, I see an array without a visible limit or center of groves charred to scarcity and generators connected beneath the roads. They are to start from. They must be connected to the metal towers mounted on the hills we passed earlier in the night, and we cannot have stayed. We are trusting them not to click to burst to light until the smoke falling above the opposite bank has crossed to us. Has it already? Was it? And we were bound to each other. Silent to feel hope through collapse, to be recovered though faceless among debris. Close your eyes and speak to me. We are in the smoke now. Is it for the last time? Was it? It is thicker and we smell rubber and propane still. Be still, not clicking to burst to light in pine resin. It is moving toward us from the stand of trees across the clearing we passed in arriving, and we cannot have stayed. We are finding reprieve in the half-light we can still. Be still, see through the higher branches, there to start from, and we, and I wanted a daughter, and we, and I pulled the box cutter from my wrist and closed the blade when I saw a crane rising from the break, and I heard other voices. A hissing comes from as far as the stalls by the gateway we passed in entering, and we cannot have stayed. The stream is darkening, and we do not hear a sudden eddy farther down it, and it is not moving still. Be still. Is it for the last time? Was it in your eyes again? And the diminished half-light, we are still. Be still. We choose not to throw what we have into the water to save it. There are metal cards and cardstock and receipts and tokens. They carry our names. Is it for the last time? Was it? And we were choosing each other still. Be still. And we are not alone. And the final poem from Jambon. Hold me with your eyes, whose craft moves without assurance in the breach of terror. Met where birdsong, traffic, dawn expected, patient and through an unsure touch, promises, now it is all right, good baby good, non-binding as I'll hold you with my eyes, through exit lanes, cop lines, if you leave no stay behind, save your eyes, okay. And that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Nate. Thank you for starting us off, and thank you, Dylan. Pedro Roland, floor is yours, sir.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's such a pleasure. Thank you, Nate, so much for that reading. It was wonderful. And thank you, Lyrae, for being here with us. It's a pleasure to introduce you. In Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon's Open Interval, the language of inquiry returns incessantly to the idea and fact of a body. At any given moment in the collection, it's impossible to separate the irreducible account of a racialized or gendered body from the scales suggested by mythic and archetypal bodies. In this book, history writ large inscribes the singing, refuting, or silent bodies in the poems at least as much as these smaller bodies put a dent on what inscribes them, what names them. Every body, whether present or absent, material or spectral, mythic or mundane, is always on the verge of saying something to another body. A sustained lyric interrogation of our mysterious density and our mysterious openness marks the end of one of the poems in the book's R.R. Lyrae series. And I quote, "Sometimes the absences in us seem so profuse, I wonder we don't pass through wood," unquote. It is certainly a cause for repeated encounters with the wonder that the body is so much what it is not, that it is also that which its absence points towards or identifies, the quantity of space-time it willingly or unwillingly displaces when it's there. As such, there is in the poetry of Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon a proposition of poetry as a quantum physics, poetry as an instrument for sounding out multiple and intersecting distances, astronomical distances, lapses between presence and remembrance, between archetype and flesh, and, as we also read in R.R. Lyrae matter, between body and name. Not unlike starlight in the astronomer's eye, her poems record the glinting of a past that is not past. And then there's also, as we encounter in another poem, Black Hole, and I quote, that crushing need for form. In our workshop space with Professor Cecil Giscombe this semester, we dwelled enthusiastically on the interval opened by that line, on the stake of poetry and the shape-giving and shape unfurling of the world so vibrantly modeled by the constellations and the arcs this book offers. The question, as all worthwhile acts of inquiry and poetry do, led us in unexpected directions. We weighed in on the quality of a language that identifies and names, that offers certainty, all while it seeks to unname, to resist the need to tether names to things in any absolute way. The force field of this oscillation is most palpable in the book's treatment of Blackness. We discuss the ways in which Blackness might also be one of the poem's many open intervals, a descriptive that always inevitably attaches itself to a multiplicity of things, places, histories, and conditions of emergence, thwarting the reflex to index what could never be indexed. Black is color, is body, is density and mystery, is absent and resoundingly present all at once. After all, the Blackness in the thing in outer space we call a black hole is not indicative of its hue, but rather a testament to an impossible concentration of space and time, a term that marks a threshold that describes our encounter with the unnameable. These words could very well begin to describe the poetry we will have the pleasure of witnessing this evening. Were I to suggest how Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon's work defines the poetic act, I would say here poetry is that which opens a field of resonance and offers forth a set of dotted lines, suggesting the hidden figures in matter and in memory, in the astral as well as the quotidian. In other words, an architecture for thinking by way of constellation, a practice of slantways argumentation that eludes the trap of fact, asking us to surrender our cherished certainties and in exchange, listen to that various and generous speaker who invites us to look out into the space above and beside us, to gather around the drop zone and see what descends and be held by the current of a river that propels us forward with abandon, as it does to the variegated speaker in the buffet dream. Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon is an associate professor of English at Cornell University. Her book, Open Interval, was a finalist for the 2009 National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize. Her first collection, Black Swan, was the winner of the 2001 Cave Canon Poetry Prize. She has also written Poems in Conversation and a Conversation, a chapbook in collaboration with Elizabeth Alexander. She has also written plays and lyrics for The Cherry, an Ithaca, New York arts collective, and is at work in a new collection of poems titled The Coal Tar Colors. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Thank you, Nate, for those wonderful poems and for sharing the evening with me. And thank you, Jess and Cecil, for the invite and for having me. And thank you all out for coming out to listen, and hi to friends that I see out there. It's so good to see you and to see your names. I'm going to read a few poems, mostly from the Dear John series from Open Interval, and then I'm going to turn to new work. So I figured I would start with the first Dear John poem in this book. Dear John, a woman writes a letter. One need read no further. Your name, the site to which she won't return. I heard mark used for mock when I was young. Old men saying, quit marking me, like birds. Swan, eagle, vulture, the summer triangle. This was the South. This is the North. And I am, and I was, astronomical parlance. Lyrae, I took to textbooks. I will leave here too, but I digress. Take you, for example. Lost. This poem, sometimes Florida seems to follow me around or like cast an atmosphere over things in a not great way. I mean, I can talk about my state of birth. I'm from, it's a strange place, Florida, and it's a strange and problematic place. And I kind of feel it this week, especially all over everything. So I thought I'd read this poem about the true story about getting lost in the swamp. Lost. The river, unrolled bolt of silk, gives evening the smell of fish, wet leaves, loosening matter. We glide through its blue plum tint toward night, the leftover tang of red wine in our mouths. Upstream, an idea waits for us. If we were lost, how much more would we love each other? We four move toward this losing with the steady creak and drip of our rowing. We cannot, in lowering darkness, tell direction, whether the frog's croak came from behind or before us. Our bellies full, the swamp beckons us behind its green drapery. Whatever hides in the tangle, the surprise of cypress knees, the fierce, sharp-edged palms welting our forearms as we walk blind through mottled nights, sulfur rot and sucking mud. What flies into our mouths, impossible to see, mosquitoes lighting in our ears, their constant whine, high-pitched and crazy-making, the silent patience of gators and our wary estimation of their hunger. We will keep, we are certain, as we lose ourselves for hours, when we find ourselves again bankside, and two must choose to swim because we're not where we began. The river moves despite our stillness, our breath breathing itself into the wet heat. Whether they disappear for good, the two who splash away, their heavy kicking swallowed by this evening. I am of the two who wait, waist high in water, eyes stretched wide to see nothing but night washing itself black over black in muggy layers, inches from my face, not my hands, skin of water, curve my breasts where I displace it, my undissolved legs immersed, merged with water, losing above, in, out of, but for these hands sliding over me, another's hands to keep me from becoming current tongue, lisp of leaf tips touching water, but for we two touching, agreeing, this is my body, agreeing, I still belong in it. Dear John, invention. There in Groningen, the body, you wait for me to give you, and your mother as I imagine her dealing with your fever, her faith, the university, a heaven of sorts, beyond you, glittering. Out the window, the voice you release, crying, here, Mick Jagger sings Wild Horses. There, Banneker carves his wooden clock, writes his note to Jefferson. There, Lavina croons, soothing you silent. The difference between sound and silence, this lying distance. And then the last one I'll read from Open Interval is Meme or Meme. I know a child who believes he passed through a black hole when he was born. Talking with him, I wonder if he somehow remembers his actual birth. What was it like? I ask him. It doesn't really matter to me whether imagination or experience makes his memory. Once in Africa, I got so stoned, I time traveled. I walked into a kitchen to find I'd entered my mother's life. It hung about me like a cloud, her apartment kitchen in the city, the 60s, visible, almost tangible. The memory still grips me, leads me by my wrist. The reefer doesn't make me believe it any less. How does memory work? Attached to some mnemonic, it's irresistible. A planet drifts off the list, but for my very educated mother, I cannot forget it. Dear Pluto, I walk this town in search of you. Think I might discover you still in my neighborhood behind the PNC, but no, that's Neptune in the little park, blue blip held embolic in the thick glass of its concrete obelisk. When my mother warned the city would get into my blood if I didn't quit returning to it, was she remembering that kitchen I visited, apparitional? I smoked myself into her Manhattan. Had she described it as someplace I would love, as my father's element, as replete with poets? I remember she called them a bunch of Afroed Black folk gathered in a basement chanting, I am angry. How did it get into her blood? It is there on the move in Florida on laundry days. My 13th birthday, I wear the ruby birthstone ring she bought me from Sears as we hang sheets. I hate the smell the backyard air will give them. She hates everything, yet insists this ritual. She is angry. I wish she'd leave the laundry to me, leave me to the itching humidity and crushed grass, the green plastic basket she shoves along beneath the line. Her anger always took her back to days of ringer washer, scrub board. She rubbed her knuckles raw against my life, left me the glint of 3 hard jewels, red for love, for July, summer, Cancer, ruby, red hard knots of blood. She died of an embolism, a word that also means prayer and nonsense, whose root means an intercalation of days to correct errors, the ways we pad the calendar so our year syncs with the solar year. Here in Ithaca, the solar systems laid out on the streets at 1/5 billionth scale. Each day, a new transparency overlaying the last, as though at last it were possible to slip corrections between summer's air stifling, thick with the weight of what can't be seen. So many thin, clear plastic sheets suffocating. And I think of that child called John, a name so common as to also mean anonymous, his name an event horizon, how the letters must hold some speck of memory, some trace of every previous John imparted to him. How can he help but feel their ever flattening pull? So I'm going to read from this manuscript that is constantly coming together and then coming apart over the past decade, which cracks me up. The first poem I'm going to read is called I, but the I is a punctuation mark. If you take one of the bonds, which are the punctuations that I use in open interval, that M dash and colon together, and you add a colon to the other end, you get an I. I call it that because it looks like the sewing notion. And I've been thinking a lot how my life as a person who makes art began in my mom's sewing room. So this is I. Notions have always been material. A flight to Paris, a pattern unfolded from a paper pouch marked facile. A snap to make, the delicate sound punctuate an afternoon in mother's sewing room. Press the small square plastic box to trap épingles in a clear case, then step on a hidden pin, prick snagged in the pink shag. Underfoot, a silver stitch in time wounds nothing heals. The rift between mother time, mine on my knees, pinning pattern to paper punctures the fabric. Orphaned girls spill out like glass head pins spilled from a case map vectors on Rue des Anglais. The haberdashery, a wife study workshop in 1838. In 1988, mother wields the pounce wheel, chalks, tracks, teeth showing the way a notion's violent. The needle jumps, but a presser foot keeps material flat while feed dogs grip. Yellow seersucker from below where what a wife is still mechanical, something held, something pierced, something guiding the process, something rhythmic sometimes I feel. Like a motherless child, sometimes I feel the orphaned girls like piecing, a shortage remedied by joining. Such lengths, a line of women in leg of mutton gigot sleeves, fabric ballooned over their arms like parachutes deflating, gone to study, seated and shrinking. Where is she? The Black wife someone's seeking to be, if not lingering, where? People press themselves, prone over lengths of silks that saved their lives, pressing the last of the air out. Where piecing hides a lack to the untrained. Without a notion how, hanger, haberdashery joined themselves in a motherless child, join a motherless child to an age, to ages. This is Self-Portrait 2020. I have been writing self-portraits since I met Michael Harper at Cave Canem way back in 1998, he would have us write these self-portraits. And so it was a thing that I used to start all my classes with from the time that I met him. This is Self-Portrait 2020. This you? Your family's over there. He pointed. I turned and saw, broken into 3 other faces, the longest matched, a child's in concentration, learning to stretch, the shape of circle to ellipse, geometry's oblong inheritance, great, great, not beauty, but a space in which to house it, heirloom and refusal to carry its whiteness, witness, moving, our citizen histories, coordinates. The man who would not love me meets the man who constructed this ruin. The earth swallowing beneath grass freshly mown, staves the bars in my throat, springing now, striped, darkly strung, a long rectangle of seasons, the green lawn on which he stood. I turned back to thank him. It was then I saw my face. When there's nothing in it, a moment's vocabulary bleeds into the week that follows, bleeds under what's missing here. Leave the house empty, unswept, leaves as evidence, a metallic warmth with which the season suffused, suffers, begs, a series of questions, the first, a bulge in the carotid. What procedures are performed in the space where weakness shapes your life? There, take that. The neurosurgeon, taken with his view, instructs from beyond a versed veil, leaving you unconvinced of your own presence. Baby, can you open your eyes? Reduced to soreness at the crook of your thigh, you've slipped yourself, snatched from soul slot. You're where, oh my God, where are you hiding now? You've searched, been searched in contrast, the channels that seared split sight. Beautiful fugitive, you'll never find the bleed. I wrote that poem after spending 5 days in the ICU last year with them looking for an aneurysm, and it's got like a little footnote in it, that little blip on the screen, I imagine, and that's got a haiku in it that just says, nobody will take your word as anything but artifact, error. Eclipse. Oh, when the moon goes down in blood. A period is a pebble, a rock that blocks a ray, a raise my heart, a beat in my ears, a chorus thud of marching boots, a crunch from which my eyes flee. Blaze, the gaze lifts, then ellipses, a wobbling slip toward strabismus, cloisters. The cellulars locatable may, alas, the signals scrambled, these devices, idling. Where am I? In a book, in the bath, in a claw foot tub, claw hammering, in a past moment, in a current set afloat on the edge of insight, of an uncooperative vision, a Black body wrapped in a white towel, anxious to reveal, then abandon. In unison, can you tell me how to get back to the sentence so I can serve it? There, a period is an embolus, a ticking clock, a bumba clot, a green fuzz tennis ball struck with such force. Who almost sees stars? Who's almost lost from whose lack of listening, girl? Adrift on an ocean, not always the Atlantic, easing the mind of a woman looking toward a child across the way. No one is white here. Only the towel is white. Lay it on the sand, lie down and relax. I would end here, except the periods full of blood, the towel soaked, the sand, the stone, the whole sea been gone red. Slumber. The left eye is a darkening blear, a heavy welling nothing stare, hooded droop with pupil lift, not squint, but sharp cornered almond shape, paired to slit drug eye, nick bruised beneath, dragging the last of contempt from couldn't care less. The right eye is art, an other world aftershock X-ray blast, white with a white ring, ultra open iris, tear stripped, a dark drop clings to bottom rim, impossibly, pupil dangling, at lash line as if prepared reversibly to slide back up to faded horror. No bridge separates left from right. No thing where nose would be if faced to keep white gape from swallowing the dark edge. A canoe pulled towards a whirlpool. In the center of the drift above the closet, the board does not dream. Dead tree, a knot is not a dream. Two knots burled over boudoir, do not sweep in rapid eye over to mind, a sleeper streaming, a film lilting about her, a lullabied surveillance, no rockaburst, the trees stop, a beam from which the words purge, a branch felling the forest, a blanched refrain from slumber, knotted, grain sliced, cut, cut. What sweetness another state is stealing from her. Dermatographia. A strange sensation announces the hives. Already I have failed to catch the truth, as sometimes it's my eyes that bank them first. What are these lines, and when did they appear? A question in pentameter, the truth reveals a rhythm in itself. And asking my skin questions. Language, what do you say about this scrawl? My skin commands, make no declaration outside the field of wonder. Intimate, instead of true despair, the way someone's ex-lover this moment turns over the word ghost. Again, I have failed. The despair is mine, and ghosting an arrival grooves on my thigh. Who has been touching me, I wonder? All week this week, I've told myself no one touches. I have stopped to run my hand over my leg, I've stopped just short of tears. A different river, this stop flow happening in 2021, and here it occurs is the apt description, the one that feels closest to sensation. Imagine standing in a river. How would it feel if suddenly all of the water stopped? The hives rise, suggest themselves as patterns on my thigh, a rill, a runnel touch, a channeled stutter over skin. This is what it feels like when nobody is close. How I feel it, this troubled ghosting. We've moved into the pandemic section of the evening. Trespass. Trust eludes us still, 9 months in, where time, the inventive, trips on untrust what ifs in a half in tiptoe stint, where a turkey high steps across the tan and green field again. This morning's small joy, scrambling thoughts on time in the bland pandemic where cue the kazoo, it has already been 3 weeks, 5 days, 10 minutes, and a second turkey jerk necking its panic pump sprint, tracking up my soundtrack meditation on trespass. I keep turning up tracks toward forgiveness, listening for forgiveness, but the skipping replay disrupts. What a joke they were, herky humping toward the dry brush as if they had already heard their own deaths waiting, where but cocked there in the morning's hard silence. And I'm just going to read 2 more, I think. Thank you all. Thrive on silence. The heat bugs rev, a sound like the struggling stutter of a pull start mower, sound stripped to tenorol, abandoning, mourning, exhausted cuticle to August sun, disembodied sound, heat bugs, zzz, as though an abstraction of sleep were to try to rouse itself to fill the hot daylight. Heat bugs, my sister said in that tone she gets of authority. I know sometimes she likes to lie. I don't hardly believe a word anyone says to me, but listen now for what they are trying to convey. A chip on my shoulder, I understood post-truth before the world soaked itself in it. True story. Once she and I drove through a forming tornado to get to Cracker Barrel. The heat bugs sing. Zzz. If that emerging storm had come together above the car, we would have filled it with the doxology, her high mountain perfect pitch and my low flat Florida Pentecostal alto, all up in the swirl with the way we say to each other, I'm circling the drain on the phone when we're feeling bad, except the opposite of that, a lifting off instead, as though we were the mist lifting off the pond when we fish with dad at 5 a.m. to beat the heat, and we overcast and snag ourselves in the trees, and we throw back the joke-worthy bass, and we bask in how he grouses after the bypass about the boat, the way it turns in the water the second he takes his hand off the throttle. And then this last poem is Thrive in the Noise and Whip. And it has an epigraph from Gwendolyn Brooks. It is lonesome, yes, for we are the last of the loud. Nevertheless, live, conduct your blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. Thrive in the noise and whip. The whirlwind forms ahead, approaches flittingly as a butterfly might, as if it would alight upon my sister and me, strengthens, becomes visible, picking up debris, waves its hubris like a flag, would whisk us as the country is now whisked, except for our mothers bind you, prayers over us, their peace be still, tisk and tell storm that harmonized knocks weather down, keeps us weighted against dry conversion to bland husks of death. Not only can I cry, I cry. I have a gift for life, my only gift. How young I learned to live nevertheless requires an elegance I put on like a woolen stole, then sheepish dropped my head as I walked in it, somehow ashamed. How soon I learned, how late. Break the line the way that you would break, have broken with those who taught you you would still run. Break the narrative. A body is a story, a severed snake's head in the sassafras, and break down tears, that fluid space from which we might reassemble flight. Thank you all.
Oh, wow. Ray, thank you so much for coming over here, coming to California, sort of, and thank you so much for the reading. I'm so really glad to hear the poems from Open Interval, obviously, and really glad to hear the new poems from this book. We'll keep talking about a lot of that and some other things as well. So as we go on, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Come back in 2 weeks and hear Divya Victor 2 weeks from tonight. I believe the 7th of October, and reading with her will be our own graduate student, Erica Higby. Thank you all for coming. I'm so happy to see faces and people that I know. Thanks and good night.